Hello guys, we are into the 13th session of our biostatistics class, and today's discussion will be about selection of study population. Whenever we have a study population, the study subject and the population has a link that we take a representative population for our study, and has to be in an adequate size and in an acceptable cost. This is the normal small cycle that we have to have in our mind. Now see, from the population we have the clinical and demographic characteristics. By calculating all those things, we will take a target population, and from that target population we have the geographical and temporal factors from which we will be selecting the accessible population, and from that accessible population to us we will be selecting a study sample. This study sample is where we are going to do all our trials or observations or analysis. Everything we will be doing in this study sample. See, when we choose our phenomena of interest, we apply it to our target population, and from that we will see if it is externally valid, and we will be applying it to the intended sample, and from that we will be seeing if it is internally valid, and we will be applying it to the actual subjects. So from there, from the research question, we come up to the study plan, and from that we study what is the internal validity, and from that factors we come to the actual study. See, there will be some myth or fact in the universe, but it will not be the same from the truth which you get in your study. So this truth you will be getting it from the findings in the study. This all is about just to give a small introduction of what it goes like. See, internal validity is that whether the findings which you get in your study can be applied to that acceptable population, the whole population, because the whole accessible population you will not be doing the study. So whether your study sample findings are applicable to the accessible population who are having the common characteristics, that's the internal validity. External validity is that whether this finding of the study is applicable to the other population who are outside who are the general population. That is the external validity. Now, coming to the answering of the questions. First, we have to this slide explains of about how our external validity and internal validity goes by, with an example of the lab rats and the street rats. Now, see, for any finding which is internally valid, it need not necessarily be generalized to the study population, because we'll be doing a study with the population who are having a common characteristics, but it need not be the same to the general population. So, see, the internal valid studies make any generalization to the other population. It need not be the same all the time, but representative samples which you are taking for your study, you have to keep in mind that they're subjected to more bias and confounding than the samples which are internally valid. This representative samples who are having that bias and confounding factors, this finding can be applicable if done without any bias, can be applicable to the generalized population. See, we can see that the analytical studies and the clinical trials which we are conducting, that should be a generalized results, but you have to keep in mind that you should not do the study in a biased manner. And but the descriptive studies we are doing, that also has to be done in an unbiased way, so that the distributions of characteristics in a population is applicable to all. Okay, so here we can see that the inclusion criteria which we are taking can be calculated when you are funneling down the population to target population and accessible population. Now when you select a study sample, from this study sample you have to exclude those individuals whom you think are not applicable for your study. These are the things which you have to keep in mind while collecting your inclusion criteria. That is the demographic characteristics, clinical characteristics, geographical characteristics, temporal characteristics. And the exclusion criteria, in this time you have to keep in mind the interference with loss to follow-up, interference with quality of data, and being at high risk of possible adverse effects. All these things you have to keep in mind when you are selecting your exclusion criteria. Now, whenever you are recruiting a population, the most important factor that you have to keep in mind is the feasibility. And when you are taking the recruitment, the major goals in your mind should be the subjects adequately represent the target population and enough subjects are able to there to meet your study sample requirements. But feasibility should be the main factor to keep in your mind. Now, at the design phase, you have to choose the population and the sampling method wisely. We'll be seeing on in the coming sessions why we have to do it. And in the implementation phase, you have to protect against the errors in applying the entry criteria to prospective study participants and monitoring the adherence to these criteria as the study progresses. Now, coming to the issues in the non-responses. The non-responses are more in observational studies and it influences the validity of inferring that sample in representing the population. This will compromise the generalizability of the study. And how we can correct it? We can have repeated contact attempts, and the design that avoids the discomfort to the participants can be chosen. Like we can give incentives, and the interviews can be in bilingual or translated questionnaire to avoid these kind of things. Okay, this is also a small summary of first we are taking the target population. We have to keep in mind our inclusion criteria. Then we come to the accessible population. That time also we have to see the inclusion criteria. Then when we funnel down to a subset of population, we have to eliminate those who do not come into our criteria. And at the sampling stage, you have to choose correct sampling technique. And in the recruitment strategy, we have to see whether there is no non-response and loss of follow-up. Thank you. Next session will be about the study plan and the project management.